Do you know, this is a terrific session, new initiatives creating change. You know, it's always good and exciting to hear what's happening in Australia. So it's going to be my pleasure to be chair for most of the session, and then I'm delighted that Kathryn Greiner will be able to take the chair from me about 3:15. So thank you for that, Kathryn. So as it says, this panel discussion will spotlight new and emerging responses that are taking shape to prevent exploitation and abuse of older people. We have 5 speakers. How did that happen? Oh, is that what's happening? You confused me. All right, we've got 4 speakers, but it looks like 5. All right. So I'm going to introduce all speakers, and then I'm going to ask them to come up one by one, so that hopefully there's a bit of time at the end, because the questions are just always the most exciting part, I think. So first of all, we have Dr. Kate Barnett, Older Persons Advocacy Network, creating a national elder abuse advocacy framework. Secondly, Jenny Blakey, Seniors Rights Victoria, Elder Abuse Action Australia, a new voice for action. Kathryn Greiner, Ageing, the best time of your life, and yes it is, so thank you. And from the Australian Men's Shed Association, a national approach, Ted Donnelly. Thank you for stepping in just at very short notice. It's a warm, encouraging audience, so don't worry. Okay. In terms of times, I'm a bit ruthless. So if you hear this, it's just time to walk to your chair. But otherwise, we do have, I think, someone in the audience that has a 2-minute, 3-minute, but 10 minutes because discussion is great. So first of all, Dr. Kate Barnett, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Do hope my presentation comes up. Our presentation. Nope. It's the last. Okay, there we go. So I'm co-presenting with my colleague Lewis Kaplan right on the end. He's going to come in towards the end. I'm going to go fairly quickly because what we've done, we've got a PowerPoint that you can access through the website that has the detail that we think you need that we can't cover in 10 minutes. OPAN, Older Persons Advocacy Network, is made up of those organisations that you can see on the screen. 1 in every state and territory, 2 in the Northern Territory, split between Darwin and Alice Springs. The OPAN network, those of you again who aren't familiar with them, undertake a range of activities in the advocacy space, a lot of which involves information and education, and does include a focus on elder abuse, and that's really what our presentation is about today, showing you to what extent that is occurring. A lot of people don't realise just how much work OPAN have been doing in this space, and a lot of it, as I will talk about further in this presentation, has been funded through state and territory governments and not federally. We wanted to make the point in our presentation that OPAN works in the aged care space, and often it's not fully recognised to what extent elder abuse can be part of that experience. There is this assumption people will be safe, and as we know, that's not always the case. We've seen these very wobbly estimates of prevalence, and I'm not going to dwell on the lack of prevalence data, but the estimates we're working with are between 2 and 10% of older Australians experiencing some form of abuse or neglect. If we look at aged care consumers, that could mean that we're thinking about anywhere between 26,000 and 130,000, we think, every year. That's a really rough guide. So it's very important for OPAN that they can tailor their advocacy services so that they can respond to elder abuse and so they can work around preventing it. So they have commissioned a review that I undertook for them, and I'll be walking you through some of those results. But one of the findings of that review was when we asked people to look at their time and estimate how much time in the OPAN group was being spent on elder abuse work of various kinds, it came to between 10 and 15%, which is actually quite a significant amount of people's time, given that's not their central role. This doesn't include the amount of time when elder abuse helplines are being serviced, and as you'll see in one of the slides, some OPAN groups are involved in providing those. Let me go back. Very quickly, just to reiterate the point around the importance of looking at elder abuse in aged care settings and in the broader community of, we might call them potential aged care consumers, that the Law Reform Commission has made a number of very important findings about this and has drawn attention to the lack of adequacy in responses. And that's very detailed, and we could do a whole presentation on that, but we're not going to do that. It said people can be more at risk of abuse if they're frail and vulnerable, and that this abuse can be something committed by other residents, as we've seen in some of the case studies this morning, or by staff or friends. So very hard to nail down. The Commonwealth Minister for Aged Care recently gave OPAN around $1 million so that they could look further into their elder abuse work, and they are currently seeking further funding to continue that work. OPAN is trying to develop more of a national focus on its elder abuse work, because what we have is a group of very state-based, territory-based organisations, and as occurs in elder abuse work generally across the country, we do have a need to have a more national and coordinated approach. So OPAN, if you like, is like a microcosm of that effort with what they're trying to do. In 2017, they brought in me to do an independent review of that work, and I might have to go very quickly through some of the findings, but it will give you a feel for it, and you can read the PowerPoint presentation later on the website. So that was my brief to inform future advocacy, education and information in relation to elder abuse through taking a more national approach. And that's the scope of the review. So it was about documenting current practice. It was mapping where this work sits within the broader elder abuse space. And that was no easy task, I can tell you, as those of you who work in that space would know. We did a case study analysis of the South Australian and Western Australian programs, where a lot of work has been done, including on collecting data on their services. And of course a literature review to see what lessons we could draw from research. Now, one of the things that's really important to remember is that OPAN might be funded by the Commonwealth Department of Health, but it is but one of several funders who shaped the work of each of the OPAN members, and key in that have been state and territory governments. But there are 4 services within that network, if you remember the second slide I showed you, who've received either state or territory government funding to provide a specific elder abuse service. So those are in South Australia, in the Northern Territory, that's very recent, in Darwin. In Tasmania, that's a very small service. And did I say WA? Anyway, you can read. So when the review work was all pulled together, I kind of divided the key activities into those 5 areas that you see on the screen. So clearly advocacy, information that's specifically to educate older people, the broader community, and service providers, and then upper level from that, education. Again, very important to support service providers, not just in aged care, but health and police, whole range of services. Linking and referring to other services, one thing I think we've probably seen already in the conference today is the importance of working across different sectoral boundaries because of the complexities of elder abuse, and this has been really critical for OPAN. Is that my warning, Jane? Yep. And collaboration to look at elder abuse at a systemic level as opposed to how it affects individuals. Now, very quickly, this will probably, to me, comparing these findings of interrogating the data from Advocare in WA and ARAS in South Australia, this seemed to mirror what I could see in other findings around elder abuse, this and the other graph slides I'm about to quickly run you through. But the types of abuse, the most common being psychological or emotional, and what we found with that was that it often doubled up. So if there was financial abuse, there was often psychological with it. So it's very hard to separate that as a separate type of abuse. Financial, social, physical, neglect, sexual, misuse of power of attorney, and substance abuse. That's just what those agencies are collecting, okay? The relationship to the person undertaking the abuse, in most cases a son or a daughter. That hasn't come out very well. Sorry. When we put it onto widescreen, we did try, but we kept losing some of the data, but you'll see it later. Spouses or partners, carers, daughters-in-laws and son-in-laws, and siblings, okay? And the different colours of the two different services. Key referral sources, primarily families. This is ARAS data, followed by service providers, mainly in aged care, followed by health professionals, and then some self-referral, which is encouraging. Key risk factors, again, the data's being collected on this, and again, I'm sorry, we've lost some of that with the wide screen, but family conflict was key, mental health. They were there, they've gone again, it's ridiculous. Psychological dependence, physical dependence, living with the abuser and physical illness. There are more, but I'm really sorry. We kept getting them back and then losing them as we converted. Helplines. The orange ones are OPAN organisations. So this gives you a reasonable idea of demand for these types of services. These are the numbers from different services, and again, they've disappeared, half of them altogether. We've got an email address on the very last slide, and what I suggest is that you email me or email Lewis and get the full presentation so you can see that detail. Do apologise. In the elder abuse space, I mentioned the critical role of state and territory governments. Why it's been critical? Because it's very much built these organisations' experience and expertise in working in these cases, and we need to take that into account in building a national response. One of the key findings, but we haven't talked about it, is the need for, yes, a national response, but enough local sensitivity to different groups with different types of needs called, for example, Aboriginal, as well as finding some consistency. But the two key advantages for OPAN in adopting a more national approach is the capacity to leverage from rather limited resources and opportunities for economies of scale. I'm going to hand over to Lewis just to do 2 more slides to finish. And you can read that slide while he's coming to the microphone. Thanks, Lewis.
So following from the recommendations from the report that Kate did, we took the balance of the $1 million that the Minister for Aged Care has contributed to OPAN and have started to build some national capacity, focusing on an advocacy and prevention program in elder abuse that would mirror the National Aged Care Advocacy Program that we're already funded to undertake, so that keeping things as much as possible simple for the government, so when a new program comes along they can look at the current program and go, yeah, that's a fit, nice and easy. Clearly you need to keep the focus on special needs groups. One of the outputs at the moment is to develop a nationally consistent data set. So we're using the data set from the states and territories that are already engaged in elder abuse work and building a national data set that's a minimal, it's two parts. One is what we must absolutely have, and then a larger component of what would be nice to have. And that should be ready in 3 or 4 months to apply across the country. We're also developing elder abuse response protocols, and we'll be working not only with OPAN organisations, but anybody and everybody who's got a protocol to bring the best of all of that together into something that we can present nationally. When we talk about nationally, we don't just mean federal government, we mean federal and state government. It's got to be nationwide, or the whole elder abuse response will fall apart. I mean, we must all be very clear that just letting the Commonwealth do this and allowing the states to walk away would be a disaster. So we're mapping partnerships, linkages and pathways. We're also looking at MOUs and flowcharts in response in various jurisdictions. Again, trying to pick the best of everybody's work, making sure that what we end up with is something that we can work with a whole range of agencies to implement. So ultimately we're developing something called the OPAN, Elder Abuse Prevention and Advocacy Program Framework. And as I say, that will complement the NACAP framework. These are I'll just leave this and walk away, but if you want to read Kate's report, which is the detail of which has been presented now, is available on the website opan.com.au/elder abuse. It's about 100 pages, but well worth reading if you're into the detail of this stuff. And if you want to contact either of us, please don't hesitate. Thank you.
I want a copy of the report because IFA will put it on our website. This is outstanding stuff. This is really solid stuff that, you know, would be amongst the best in the world. So, you know, let's make contact. You know, so be proud that this kind of stuff that you've just talked about is real leadership stuff. Jenny, please come to the podium. Jenny, can someone else hand out? Yep, that'd be great. And 10 minutes just doesn't do justice to these presentations. So encourage that we talk to one another, but also make sure that we get copies of these reports.
Is this set up to go for me?
I think if you keep pressing this, there you go. Okay.
Good. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you everyone for coming and being interested in the topic of new initiatives, and certainly one of the new initiatives that's around, given that there is such an interest and a growth in the issue and of elder abuse, is the development of a new national body called Elder Abuse Action Australia. And I'll talk to you a little bit about where did we come from and who are we and what are we. It's come from a bit of a journey over the last few years. In 2012, there was the very first national conference of elder abuse, and that was in Brisbane. And I had only just started in my role at that time. And one of the people from my organisation, a couple of people went up there and they came back and they were so excited because they had met with other people who were working in the same area as they are in different states. And we hadn't really had that strong contact. And so there was an enthusiasm about talking to each other about the same issues and the same practice problems and about elder abuse. And out of that came the desire to have regular national conferences. So they came back and said 4 other states have agreed to hold national conferences in the coming years, and that's what we've had since then. The next one in Adelaide, people were again wanting to work nationally, trying to bring it together, and they wanted to try and have the coordination in communicating with each other and understanding about what each other was doing, because we found there was duplication. Someone had done a project similar to what we had done, and why didn't we know about it? We'd wasted our time. We could have worked together. And then being fascinated about what other people had done. So from the conference in Adelaide, there was a decision to try and develop a website which would be like a national hub, and that would hold information from each of the states about what people were engaged in, but also hold the repository of knowledge and information for the general public, for academia and research and government. We got some assistance pro bono to set it up, but we ran out of resources and it didn't continue. We met again in Perth, and then the decision was to have a day which was a strategy day. And as we came together and looked at what do we want to try and achieve around elder abuse, and we developed some goals and we tried to work out who might be the parties who attended that might be able to act on those. And there were 3 things which were quite simple. One was to come together nationally around World Elder Abuse Awareness Day and try and do some consistent messaging and promotion around that. The other was to set up a chat website where there could be an exchange and discussion of issues. And the other was to put together an annual report which brought together all the information from the different services around Australia. Well, we didn't get very far with the World. We had national approach. The discussions room started, but it really didn't get traction. but the annual report did. And again, when we had the next national conference was in Melbourne, and I'm from Melbourne, I thought, what's gone wrong? We've got this desire, this enthusiasm when we get together, but it never quite follows through. And we thought it's the lack of resourcing. We're all very busy delivering at a state level in our services. So the idea was to talk about setting up a national body which would be resourced and then could further the desires of the people that have been coming as those who'd been engaged in the direct service delivery of elder abuse services. So at the Melbourne conference, we had a day where we worked on it and we said, yes, let's see if we can set up a national body. Let's try and improve our collaboration, because it's really important that we try and work across disciplines and bring the different states together and try and get the national government to address this issue, because there had been work done obviously in the states, but at that time there was an absence of the federal government being active in elder abuse. We had a steering group that we set up, and we contracted Kate, as a matter of fact, to develop an options paper for us, which was looking at the different ways that we could form and what were the goals and the strategies that people wanted the organisation or this national body to undertake. The other thing that people were clear on is that they didn't want it to be a direct service body. So I think that's the prime difference between OPAN and EAAA, Elder Abuse Action Australia. So that they wanted it to be a body which was a voice for elder abuse. We want to really say what the issues are. So we worked on the options paper and worked on it in a way, we got the network together again, and they selected, or we had people put their hands up and they were accepted to form a working group. And we then sallied forth. So we selected a name, we put names around and voted on it, and then we've had the name registered with ASIC. So we are a growing network of organisations and individuals that work in elder abuse prevention and support services around Australia, and or support the elimination of elder abuse. And we're unique in our multidisciplinary membership. So we're cross-jurisdictional, and we're trying to bring together the silos of the different aspects that work in this space. We are primarily a voice for action, so that there's a strong focus on systemic change and policy development and promotion of law reform and institutional change. As I said, we're multidisciplinary, and when we first started meeting, it was really the legal sector, the advocacy sector and aged care sector. Well, it's grown enormously. From 40 people who attended the conference, 50 people who attended the conference in Brisbane, to 560 now. You can see how enormous it is. And there's been an inquiry in almost every state about elder abuse, and now that the federal government has become very engaged in this space. So there are now services that are involved that are from the health sector, financial sector, legal, non-legal advocacy. We want practitioners and academics and researchers and older people to become part of this national body. As we know, elder abuse touches across various sectors, so we need to make sure that we're inclusive of those various sectors. And we want to bridge the practice, policy and research to bring that together and learn from those and inform each other, each of those functions. So these are our objects, and the first two relate to having a focus on rights and respect for older people, so that they have got that principle embedded in them. The others are the ones that are the clearer goals in terms of what we're wanting to do. So around public policy, raising awareness and providing education, and we're talking about that as a national level, so that we're looking at the national focus again about how we have that education occur. To produce, communicate and share and coordinate information and resources, to build capacity through community of practice. So the sort of things that OPAN are doing are the sorts of things that we're really keen to see, a community of practice across the various sectors of people who are engaged in this area. And to build research, and there was a keenness to engage in research or support the development of research around elder abuse, to give us evidence-based strategies. and to advocate for the collection of data, consistent data. The members we have individuals, so you can be someone who's working in the field, or could be an older person or whoever. So individuals can become a member. There can be organisations who are members as well. We've weighted the voting so that there's greater voting for individuals, 3 votes for an organisation, 1 for an individual. We're planning to incorporate as a company limited by guarantee, and so we're in the process of setting that up. We are considering that we would exclude government entities because we're likely to be lobbying those people. We can certainly work with them in alliances and partnerships as appropriate, and also for-profit organisations, because we want to make sure that it's kept separate from industry voices, I suppose. Currently, we've got a draft constitution, which we're getting some assistance from a law firm, Lander and Rogers, pro bono. We're checking the constitution to see whether it meets deductible gift recipient status and public benevolent institution status, so we're then able to receive grants from philanthropic organisations and trusts. We're about to receive, as soon as we finish our incorporation, a grant from the Federal Attorney General, which is $250,000 over 2 years. So $125,000 a year, not a lot, but it is a seeding grant, and they recognise that it's an establishment grant. So we're very hopeful that this is the beginning of things which will become bigger. There is the National Plan to Protect Older Australians, and we'll be wanting to engage in policy discussions and advocacy with the government around that. We've got a working group to set up the company, and we've been in the process of setting our priorities for the next 2 years. In fact, last night we had a meeting of those who are interested in EAAA, and we looked at what are the things that we must do in the next 2 years and what are the things that would be nice to do in the next 2 years. And we'll be compiling that and then setting that out as our activity and our work plan for the next 2 years. So we need to work on the board roles and responsibilities to set up an office and a budget and employ some staff, and develop our internal communications and engagement strategy. So that's encouraging people to become members and communicating to our members, and also an engagement and communication strategy with key stakeholders who are also in this area, and also with government, and participate in the national plan. And the Knowledge Hub was also announced by the federal government, and it was stated that it was something that EAAA would support, so we would be developing our role. And here we are back to Adelaide 2014 with the Knowledge Hub, and it happened this time. So that is, I guess, a bit of a testament to the direction that we've chosen and the seeing it come into fruition. My vision for EAAA, Older Abuse Action Australia, is that we'll have a strong and vibrant membership across lots of sectors, that we will be an active public voice speaking out on issues, that will be engaged with government and institutions around sector change and attitude change. And I really hope that people here may come along with that journey with us, because we're starting small, we're going to be smart, but we've got a long future ahead of us. I've handed out expressions of interest for membership. So if you're interested in becoming a member, fill it out or take it away and think about it, and send it back in. And for those of you who fill it out, if you could just leave it at the back of the room next to those glasses, and I'll pick them up later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I think one of the challenges, in coming to a conference like this for me, is that there are many things happening. And it's about, what is the coherent story? What overlaps with what? And I know with the organisation that I run, I know what we do, but most importantly, I know what we don't do. And I think when we're in this field, certainly I come here and I get excited about, being that person up the front and being the activist, but that's not what the IFA does. And so I think it's a great initiative, and I'd be interested to know, how does that overlap with OPAN, and who connects with the legal fraternity, and so that needs to be a strategic discussion even before you get to start talking about a national plan. So it's all of those conversations that we as civil society need to be having before going forward. It's so unique to have Kathryn Greiner with us today. Kathryn, you know, AO, New South Wales Retirement Village Inquiry Lead 2007 and the chair of the Ministerial Advisory Council on Ageing. You know, you've seen it from different perspectives, haven't you? And so, you know, being a former politician, but also being in the hot seat in inquiry, as well as being the chair. So welcome to this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, very much, and it's a great pleasure to be with you. Going the other way. No, I was going right. There we go. Look, my words today, because this session is about some of the new initiatives, what's actually happening in the area, and maybe, Jane, I can do some of that strategic thinking about what we're doing here and give you a slightly broader picture. As chair of the Ministerial Advisory Council on Ageing and also as the lead of the 2017 inquiry into retirement villages, when I was invited to speak here, we were thinking that that report would be what I would be speaking about. Unfortunately, I got my report in on time on the 15th of December and I haven't heard another word since. So it's somewhere out there in the ether with the Minister, but it'll appear at some stage. So, of course, I can't speak about that. So I thought to switch a little bit, I talk a little bit more about state governments taking a strategic role in aged care and in the process of ageing. So I'm going to speak a little bit about that. But before I do that, I want to acknowledge two of my MACA colleagues, Roy Starkey, who's here, Professor Tracy McDonald, who will be speaking tomorrow. And thank them and the members of the MACA for the work that they do. This is the new initiative sessions, and I want to talk to you about four things today: cumulative disadvantage, creating ageing, that's meant to be creative ageing, combating, you can see who had the grandchildren last week, can't you? Creative ageing, combating ageism. We talked a little bit about that this morning in some of the sessions that I was at, and the importance of connectivity. Now, these are the broad brush areas. Just to go back for 1 second, the New South Wales government about 5 or 6 years ago developed a whole of government ageing strategy. And I have to say to those of you who are here from representing other governments and doing work with other governments, unless you have a whole of government ageing strategy, you may as well whistle in the wind, because nothing's going to change. Doesn't mean that the whole of government is 150% behind the ageing strategy, but we beat them up from time to time to just keep them on the path. So it's about the lens that the government applies to ageing and the lens of every bit of legislation. What's the impact on older people in our community? What are the needs of older people in our community? How will this improve their future? And I remind you that there are going to be more of us than there are of them very soon. And we have the money, mostly. So let me start, first of all, talking about cumulative disadvantage. And cumulative disadvantage, and I thank Roy and Tracy for their work in this area. And Tracy speaks more eloquently than I ever could about this in tomorrow afternoon's session. Cumulative disadvantage is that point where you actually understand that we talk about the gap getting bigger and wider. If for older people, it becomes a chasm. There are some people who are able to financially care for themselves, who have their own home, who have had the advantage of a great education and have had a life relatively stress-free and relatively healthy. And then there is everybody else in our society, which is all of us, who are in all of that space. And that cumulative disadvantage means when you start out behind the 8 ball, you continue behind the 8 ball almost without exception all your life. Now, if government doesn't have a lens like that on its social policy framework, then nothing changes. And I've been around, I won't tell you how long I've graduated from social work, but I've been around a very, very, very long time in this space, and I see little shift of the dial. So through cumulative disadvantage, we think you're going to move then into creative housing options, where there are different ways of providing housing. There's a big risk for women who have been in the workforce for fewer years than men, don't have an acquired superannuation fund, who hit their retirement years, they don't have enough to continue renting in the private sector, and then they end up in the public housing or the homeless sector. And take a look at the SBS program on that space if you haven't already seen it. We think in terms of employment options, starting with the public service, transitioning people to retirement so you keep people working longer. If the Commonwealth Government is going to increase the pension age to 72, then up to 75, you don't retire at 65. You just don't. And so you need to actually have an insurance scheme called workers' compensation that goes beyond 65. And it's a no-brainer. Encouraging, through cumulative disadvantage, encouraging technology, encouraging ideas, encouraging groups like Uber to get out into the country. Regional New South Wales. Those of you who are from any regional or from any state in Australia know that in our regional communities, the services often are sparse and disconnected. We have people in New South Wales, our ageing strategy, our ageing demographic is the entire east coastline. And if you go up to the back parts of northern New South Wales, for people who live out away from Lismore or Grafton, if you don't get to the school bus in the morning at 7:30 and come home in the school bus in the afternoon at 4:30, you don't get to the doctor. You don't get shopping. You don't even get to see your friends. That's the way we live. So we have to encourage a lot more disruption in that particular space. And creative ageing. Creative ageing is actually about the medical profession coming to grips with the fact that they have to, the medical profession and the legal profession coming to grips with the fact that we are all ageing and the ageing process. So let's have less drugs being prescribed and a lot more community choirs and community outlets for creative activities. The arts companies of New South Wales, I've challenged them all. What is your ageing strategy? Not just about bringing older people into your performances, which is important, but how can you engage them? And the New South Wales Art Gallery is doing that very well. People understanding depression versus loneliness and how the two can be interlinked, both ways, the sliding scale, you know it more than I do. Banks being more inventive in engagement with the community. I'd like to see far more choirs singing in some of those beautiful banking chambers, and the one just around the corner here, which is Martin Place and Elizabeth Street, has the most wonderful acoustics. If you've ever heard of a group singing or playing in there, it's superb. Now, I do that in a half-hearted way, but we talked earlier in the previous session, for those who were here, about the digital issues to do with people, older people getting online, understanding banking and understanding that they have to do that. The issue that they're going to have to deal with comes from the banks, and I'm not seeing a lot of opportunity. Combating ageism and connectivity. Macromedia Awards was started 2 or 3 years ago to change the perceptions of ageing. I don't want to see 98-year-olds jumping out of the plane, thanks. That's fine for that particular 98-year-old to jump out of a plane with a parachute on her back, but that's exceptionalism. That's not normal. But what I do want to see is people who are gardening, who are active, who are dancing, who are part of community choirs, who are doing their PhD at 85, if that's what they want to do, who are looking after their grandchildren, who are members, active members in their community, and having their community respond to the needs that older people have to keep them active. Intergenerational engagement with these awards is an area that we're exploring this year. How can we now perhaps move this where younger people take the oral histories from older people in their community and find ways of actually engaging and drawing younger people into the awards? Connectivity and sorry if I skipped that one. And connectivity. Connectivity, terribly important. It's like the railway stations of old. If you don't have an iPad in your home, and our view is the Commonwealth and state partnership should be to ensure a laptop in every home, but you actually have to be able to afford the connectivity and the package that goes with it. $50 a month is a huge whack, and it's the cheapest plan I can find, huge whack out of anybody's budget. So get a grip, Commonwealth and state governments. This is just like the advent of the telephone or the steam train. Telcos have to do a lot more work in terms of working with seniors cards discounts aided by government subsidy, which is actually the taxpayers of Australia. Tech-savvy seniors have partnered with MACA to roll out into communities the opportunity to learn about how to use your computer, how to bank online, how to actually make an Instagram account, take photos that you share with your grandchildren. Telstra has been very active in this space, but we want to see more of it. And so I come to an end, which I think I'm about in the right time, and I love this quote from Sophia Loren. There is a fountain of youth. It is your mind, your talents, the creativity you bring to your life, and the lives of people you love. When you learn to tap this source, you will have truly defeated age. Thank you. And now I switch from speaker to chair, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Ted Donnelly AM. Ted founded the Australian Men's Shed Association in 2007 and wrote a manual about tips on how to start a men's shed, which has been picked up across the globe. Ted was recognised for his contribution to men's health by being awarded the Lane Cove Senior Citizen of the Year in 2013. He's an immediate past president of Men's Shed and current president and founder of the Lane Cove Men's Shed, and he's stepped in at very, very short notice, as in today. So, Ted, thank you.
Yes, this is a slide-free presentation. In fact, it wasn't even finished till 11 o'clock this morning. Men's sheds. It seems to me that what I've been hearing here today is really very specialised. And what I'm hearing from me, how great men's sheds are, doesn't really fit into this. So the questions, as we said before, the questions are really the meat of these things. So I'm going to just skim through here and cut out various chunks of it just to get the points that might be useful in getting across this idea of elder abuse. So forgive me because I'm going to have to read bits of this because I haven't got slides. Just to let you know that the men's shed movement started here 20 years ago. And AMSA now, the Australian Men's Shed Association, it has a membership of 1,000 sheds. Now, it doesn't sound too many of that, but that's 130 more sheds than there are McDonald's outlets in Australia. So, you know, and more useful. But basically, a men's shed is just a place where men come together without any discrimination in a safe, friendly group, and they do something useful together. And usually that's for the local community. The general perception of a men's shed is that it is a workshop, but in fact that's not true. Many places aren't workshops. The real value is bringing the blokes together in a socialising and developing an atmosphere of mateship. And that's really what men's sheds are. They're places where there's a community spirit rather than a place where they make beautiful pieces of furniture. So we'll skip that. But the one thing is that, as I say, there's 1,000 of them here in Australia. So it's a big organisation. It's now gone overseas, and there's now, currently they've got another 1,000 sheds set up in other countries overseas. The thing is that in the shed, the men get to trust each other. They build up the mateship, and the problem with men is all their life they've learnt not to talk about feelings and emotions. But once they get into the shed, and they've been there for a few weeks, varies, then they open out and they start to talk. Sometimes it's like opening a dam, quite honestly. It's difficult to stop them. But they can really talk about all sorts of things that quite honestly their wives will be amazed at, to be honest. And really it's this fact that the men can come together and hold a conversation and discuss a subject that really has been of interest to a lot of outside organisations who want some way of getting across their message to men. And we've worked with a number of people on this. They found it's much more effective to deliver their information into the shed, where there is then a discussion among blokes and they go and tell their wives. That's much more effective than leaving pamphlets in the doctor's waiting room that nobody picks up. And bearing in mind that this 1,000 sheds actually accounts for something like about 175,000 men, and the information that's there goes back to the families again, so it's a pretty desirable target. Well, AMSA's collaborated and formed strategic partnerships with a number of health-related communities, Beyond Blue, Heart Foundation, Cancer Council, a whole load of them. And we've developed internal resources for this, and also we've developed a variety of national initiatives linked to these organisations. So that, for instance, with Beyond Blue, we've had a long relationship with them. They started off by sending us a whole series of booklets and pamphlets out to every shed. These were discussed and then they were followed up by visits. So we've had a really good relationship, and it has opened up the topic to a whole range of people that they wouldn't have got through to otherwise. AMSA here, we're struggling a bit with elder abuse because basically we just don't know what we can do to help. We're a preventative group, really. But we can get information across because of the size and the number of people. We can help to get across information that you have, information that is understandable by the normal person. But in this conference here is talking about the elderly. And of course, most of the people in men's sheds are elderly. But we think that they are fairly well protected because we have strong rules on violence and aggressive behaviour in sheds. And also the men trust each other, so they talk things out and they know they can discuss things. But the thing that worries me are men in retirement villages. I moved into a retirement village 5 years ago, and of course I set up a men's shed. But I've been involved in men's shed startup for a long, long time. And the problem with retirement villages is that they try to copy the community type of men's shed. And they are not the community. All they need is a place where men can come and socialise and get together. Our room has a workbench, and we have basic tools to make it reminiscent of a garden shed. But we promote it to the residents as a drop-in coffee and chat facility. And with the opportunity of doing practical work if you want to. And this has worked very, very well indeed. And in fact, it works with the elder group because, in fact, strangely enough, 2 weeks ago, one of the men in the shed asked the group, his son was wanting him to take out half of his mortgage. And he was worried about this. And he wanted to discuss this with his new friends in the shed. So the system works. So we have a big organisation. We're willing to do joint projects with some of the groups if we can. And certainly we would like to get information from you on how we can, I'm hoping to get from this conference, how we can recognise and deal with aspects of elder abuse. Thank you.
Ted, thank you very much, and thank you to all of our speakers. Now, let's time for questions from the floor. Over to you. And the first one's always going to be the hardest, and we do have a wonderful roving mic. Yes, just a question just here. Thanks, just there.
Hi, my name's Jodie. I work with the Commonwealth Home Support Providers of the Central Coast in New South Wales, and just practicality, Ted, in terms of if we're engaging in community projects and we would like to engage with the men's shed, is it best to get in touch with our local sheds, or should we go through the peak? Yep.
Great. Good. And just here, there's a question.
I'm Annette Bray and I'm a member of the Older Women's Network, and we work very similar to you in that we encourage older women to get involved with things. We have about 7 what we call wellness centres where the women come and do exercises or have a guest speaker and whatever. And so we're doing a very similar thing to you. So I just thought that I want you all to know there is an older women's network.
There's a question right at the very back of the room from my colleague from MACA, Roy Starkey.
Thanks, Kathryn. Thank you, all the presenters. One of the things that's concerned me today with everything, and I'd like to put this to the representatives of OPAN and EAAA, with preventing the abuse of the older person, I haven't heard about any proposal for education programs for younger generations. Now, the perpetrators mainly of elder abuse is the younger generation, generally family, but I haven't heard anything about education taking it right back down to high schools, so that we can actually combat it and prevent it. So what preventative strategies are in place coming out of either the Commonwealth or out of state governments?
Would you like to? Yes, go ahead. Yeah, no, just from the microphone if you can. Yep.
That's a very good question, and I think that there hasn't been a lot of effort put into preventative activities here in Australia around elder abuse, and I think that there's a lot to be done to test the evidence about what works. And I'm conscious of that because in Victoria we've been very heavily involved in our family violence reform agenda, and there has been a lot of work which has been looking at the prevention of gender inequity to prevent family violence, focusing it of course around women who are way the gender that is experienced the sexual abuse and family violence. We've tried to participate in that family violence reform agenda and try to address some of the issues that arise as drivers of gender inequity, which you could transfer potentially to drivers of ageism. So it's about the way, which we've talked a bit about, as you said, how older people are viewed in our community, about the structures that are in place to ensure that there isn't discrimination. But one of the things that, to tackle the point you're making, is that there's been the respect for relationships in schools. And that's been very much around gender equity and respect for sexual preference and those sorts of things. But we've been advocating that that also pick up the issue about the discrimination or the awareness of the differences and bringing the respect between the different generations. So that I think that there could be some potential around that. But it's quite fertile ground in terms of what can be done. The Victorian government has also funded elder abuse prevention networks. So it's another attempt to try and do some work around prevention. And so local areas where there's a lead agency has been funded to form a network and to undertake preventative activities. And there's been a lot of discussion around the different types of prevention: primary prevention, secondary prevention. But the idea is to try and engage in primary prevention, which is addressing the drivers. So I think it's a bit about that sort of positive ageing, public events where people are visible as older people and in part of the community. But it's a lot of work that's got to be done in that area.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings our session to a conclusion. So thank you all for your attendance, and thank you to our speakers.